Hello, this is a complete list of books I've read in 2023. What's going to follow basically is just, a combination of all the videos I did for each month because, far easier as those videos have already been edited. And I'll say it at the end, but I'm going to say it right now. Thank you all those who watched. I hope maybe some of you saw a book on the list, said that was cool, and actually purchased it. Hello, everyone. So today I will be going over all the books I read in January. There are 11 total. The first was The Elusive Purple Gang. This is a book about organized crime in Detroit, specifically around the era of Prohibition. Very good read by a guy who used to be local. 50 Ways to a Safer World. This was actually taken from the library at the place that I work. I work alongside a lot of social workers, and they have their own literature section on the second floor. Really just a sweet book about safety and children's safety and even adult safety and everything like that. The Myth of Sisyphus. This was a deep read. This is Albert Camus, for my father there, who corrected my pronunciation. The Myth of Sisyphus is about taking on the issue of suicide in modern society. Heavy read. Strongly recommend, but do be warned if you know somebody who committed suicide, this could be a bit of a sensitive topic for you. Grinding It Out. So, like a lot of people growing up in America, my first job, actual job where I got a paycheck and everything, was working at McDonald's. And this is the autobiography of Ray Kroc, the person who franchised most of those McDonald's and in time became its owner. There was a pretty good movie. I generally don't recommend movies, but The Founder was a good movie. It starred Michael Keaton as Ray Kroc. Very interesting stuff here. This book is extremely quick read considering it's a business exec's autobiography. In my experience, they tend to be a bit full of themselves. Chariots of the Gods. This is a book by Eric von Daniken that popularized the concept of ancient astronauts, which then is now called ancient aliens. Interesting stuff. The book starts off with some interesting observations about ancient civilizations, but it's not long before it goes to utter, bat crap crazy. Thus Spoke Zarathustra. This was a good month for philosophy reads, I guess. And, hey, it's January and full winter force has hit Michigan here. I'll tell you that much. So Also Sprach Zarathustra is an interesting book. It's an allegorical fiction book by Friedrich Nietzsche, but he lays out a lot of his beliefs. Lake Monsters and Odd Creatures of the Great Lakes. This author was supposed to speak at an event that I was going to, but that got canceled and pushed to March. But, semi-interesting read. I will say this, though, the pictures and graphics are pretty bad. Dinotopia. So, shout out to my friend Coco. She had recommended she recommended this year that I try to read more feel-good books. Now, art has many purposes, and art's job is not always to make you feel good. But certainly that is its job some of the time. And so I took that to heart, and I read this Dinotopia, A Land Apart from Time. Great art in this book, but also, if you bother to pay attention, some really good writing. The Gardner Heist. So I'm actually the organizer of a true crime book club, and The Gardner Heist was huge, man. It is, I believe, still to date the largest theft in terms of monetary value of stuff stolen, because the paintings that were taken on the market, I think, have been appraised at $500 million total. And no idea who committed the crime. I have my own theories, but I'm not going to go really deep into that. This was a good book and actually published by the Smithsonian Books, so it's accurate. Havana Nocturne. Boy, this one feels like it's been on my radar forever, but for those of you who might not know, This is all about the story of the mob and as it was being built up and as it was built into the recreation of Havana. And this is prior to Fidel Castro taking over Cuba. So, in other words, most of this happens under the regime of Fulgencio Baptista, I think is how it's pronounced. A very interesting story, of course. This book is very heavy on Meyer Lansky, who sometimes is overshadowed by his peers in terms of underworld corruption. History Will Absolve Me. I actually found this book by accident. History Will Absolve Me is... I found out about it when I read Havana Nocturne, which basically just means Havana Night. And History Will Absolve Me is a phrase that Fidel Castro used when he was actually about to be exiled and he went before a special tribunal for crimes against the state. It's written by somebody who is a former CIA analyst, claims to have been CIA's top guy for analyzing Cuba. This is some pretty interesting stuff. It is not the actual speech he gave at his special tribunal. I've been trying to track that down because that's titled History Will Absolve Me as well. This is not that. This was a quick and easy read for somebody who wants to know about Castro and his regime from the intelligence side. And trust me, they did some pretty... When I say they, what I mean is the Cuban government did some really interesting stuff during the Cold War, military adventures abroad, and, they were able to get around and sometimes show up our own intelligence apparatus. So pretty interesting stuff overall. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I've had to go through a power outage that was... my power was out for several days, and I got really behind on posting, unfortunately. The tragedy of having your power out for about a week is the fact that your chores and things that you can't get done stack up, in addition to, of course, finding warmth. So I'm behind on my videos. This one's going to be quick. It's just a list of books I read for this month. Murder and Mayhem in Washtenaw County by a local historian named James Thomas Mann. I Have a Dream, Writings and Speeches That Changed the World. This is just a collection of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches and some of his writings, such as letters. The End of White World Supremacy, 4 speeches. This is actually not a book by Malcolm X, although he is on the cover right here. This book is actually by Benjamin Karim. And when we talk about some of these civil rights leaders, you got to keep in mind they were assassinated in the 60s. So you had to comb over archival footage and things like that to be able to transcribe some of these. Ain't I a Woman? More so a book on philosophy. This is a good read for people who are intersectional feminists. A Little Secret for Dealing with Teens. This was just a fun read by a woman who says you should bring business principles to dealing with your teenage children. On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. This was a good book. I actually did a video just on this where I go over 2 very valuable lessons. Playing Chess with the Devil. I actually picked this up as kind of a compulsive buy because it was literally next to a book that I had decided I wanted to read. I'm glad I did. This is by a local author who, they had a father who died of ALS, and it's about the struggle of dealing with that disease. Who's Sorry Now? This is the memoir of a movie and TV actor. He was in the Matrix series. He was also in The Sopranos. So, and it's funny, he takes some of the pronunciation of the words he uses in The Sopranos from his mother. By the way, he's from Hoboken, Joe Pantoliano, and therefore he's probably the second most famous person from Hoboken. Many of you should know who the most famous is. Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin. This is a sort of memoir and essays of James Baldwin. A brilliant man, great writer. If you look at lists of top 10 American authors, he's not on all of them, but he's on about half of them. He spent some time abroad as well. And in the 50s and 60s, he was prominent in the civil rights movement. And he black, gay, and atheist. This was just a fun book I picked up on the history of what we're taught about, the occult. So if you want to know things like where tarot began and all that, why we have the conceptions we do of people who are participating in these religions, this is a fun read, but don't look for heavy sociological material. Where do we go from here? Chaos or Community? By Martin Luther King Jr. This is not a collection other people made of his writings. This is a book he himself actually wrote. Very interesting. There are several really prominent things that he mentions in this book that we have to deal with now. So he was very forward-thinking. He mentions cybernetics. He talks about automation. He discusses globalization. And he touches on universal basic income. The Beast of Bray Road. And this was a horrible book. I mean, just on many fronts. Definitely you can skip it. It's a local folklore book. I did a deep dive on a piece of Michigan folklore. I might do a video about it, about the Dogman sightings that happened in the late 70s or I think very early 80s here in Michigan. And while doing that deep dive, came across this work. It's utter trash. Thank you. So this is a list of the books I read for the month of March. March, not really necessarily a good reading month for me. Got off to a slow start and whatnot. It began with 2 very small books I got for free from the Ann Arbor District Library. First one here is Polar Bears and Other Arctic Animals. Basically just a fascinating, quick read of polar bears, their capabilities, and man, they're a terrifying beast. Also, how other Arctic animals stay alive. The Biggest Animal Ever. This was actually clearly aimed at very young readers, but yeah, I busted out at work. Hey, whales fascinate me. Especially the blue whale, it's big. So, as some of you know, I work at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services building, and I try to get to know the professional literature. So I read this, Children Who Shock and Surprise, A Guide to Attachment Disorders. It's really not comfortable knowing that how trauma experienced very young can actually stick with people their whole lives. Cross-Cultural Adoption. This book is actually aimed at 2 audiences. Those who are thinking about adopting, and those who maybe have a friend or family member who's adopting, and they want to know how to help them, what to refer to the adopted children as. Again, I want to make it clear, not interested in adoption, but yes, this is a thing at the building I work at. Children with prenatal alcohol and or other drug exposure. Yeah. Children who are conceived and their parents are abusing drugs, they can have some negative health effects. The good news is that most will actually grow out of that. Tales from the Haunted South, Dark Tourism and Memories of Slavery from the Civil War Era. So, those of you who know something about ghost hunting or paranormal investigation or ghost tourism, those stories you hear about, this location was once part of the Underground Railroad, and or this location is haunted or built on an Indian burial ground. Almost all of that is complete and utter garbage and lies. But does it hurt anybody? This book actually makes a very good argument that it does, although it's written by a historian, not a philosopher, so it would be interesting to get a philosophical take on that. UFO encounters, sightings, visitations, investigations. I'm part of a paranormal meetup group, and the ufologists, that's people who are into studying UFOs, they're having a moment now with all the sightings in the sky and the intrigue with the balloons. Mothman and Other Flying Creatures of the Midwest. Actually met this author in the month of March. I read this book knowing that she was scheduled to speak. Interestingly enough, the book I got off of Amazon was a used version. Why Does For Witching... excuse me. Why Does For Witching... This is actually a very odd book. It's a horror book, supernatural. Basically, this house was cursed by a matriarch who's like the great-great-grandmother of the protagonist. And the author has a very weird style of writing. Perspective shifts, and you don't necessarily know it's shifting. Now, as you read, you realize the author does have a device for letting you know perspective is about to shift, but it can be tricky at first. Overall, though, good read, tore it up in 2 days. Where Monsters Hide. This is my first book by William Phelps. It will not be my last. This is a good writer. Also, too, very prolific. And this is about a murder that happened in Michigan and also Indiana. Rainfall of the Lake Country for the Last 25 Years by Mark Jefferson. Don't know how I got my hands on this. It should probably be in the archives, but it was just out in the faculty section of Holley Library, so I grabbed it and read it. Freemasons for Dummies. The For Dummies series always does it for me. Even topics that I'm not interested in, they have found a way to make entertaining. And I work with some Freemasons. So wanted to understand that from the cultural aspects. Thank you. So this is the April reads list here. This is 11 books that I read in the month of April. First one is going to be Only Words by Catherine McKinnon. And this is about how pornography should be illegal because it's hate speech. While I don't necessarily agree with every aspect of her arguments in this book, people should read this just to know how to structure an argument and be very persuasive. Catherine McKinnon is a scholar, but her day job, what she made her trade on, was being a lawyer, specifically human rights lawyers specializing in issues concerning women. Lots of interesting things she's done in terms of legislation, but as I said before, even if you don't agree with her position, read this book and it'll give you an idea of how to structure your position. All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. This was just a nice, fun, lighthearted read. Lighthearted read. My friend Co suggested you do one of these every so often, especially if you're like me and you like to read a lot of hard-hitting nonfiction stuff. Essentially, just thoughts and commentary by a pastor who I think is a Universal Unitarian pastor. The Interlopers, a short story that I bought on my Kindle. This is about two guys who have gone into the woods, part of an old family feud, and want to kill each other. They end up in a situation, though, that for the most part they're going to die, so the bravado wears off and they focus on how they should be working together. I think somebody said it best. The theme of this book is often we come to the emotion of regret when it's far too late. Countering Bioterrorism, the Role of Science and Technology. This is definitely one of what I would call the hard criminology reads. Hard not meaning difficult to ingest, but hard meaning is in that, it's an official type report by an agency, or rather an organization, and it's not designed to entertain or appeal to people like, say, a true crime book is. Nevertheless, very interesting stuff. Stone, A Legacy and Inspiration for Art. If you ever have a question on anything regarding, how does a statue begin, essentially, a stone statue or whatnot, You know, how is it taken from a quarry? What exactly is a real stonemason? This book will answer those questions for you. A beautiful art book, but also very informative as well. Al Capone, a biography. Okay, right away, I'm loving that it was written by a guy whose first name is Luciano. Um, that's just awesome. So, this book actually it takes a more so cultural look at Al Capone through the lens of how he was treated as an Italian American. It spends, I believe, a disproportionate amount of time waxing poetic about the actual trial that got him locked up, kind of making it out to be like it was almost a hate trial or racially motivated. Al Capone, certainly a criminal we know, did a lot of stuff. Of course, we weren't able to get, you know, actual things against him because he was clever. Yeah, he didn't do his own dirty work, and he made sure to be out of Chicago when some of the worst of the violence was actually going on. Yeah, and certain things were done. Basically, the government pursued him with a lot of zest for tax charges because it was the only thing that would stick. Southern Horrors and Other Writings, the anti-lynching campaign of Ida B. Wells. I could probably do a whole video on Ida B. Wells. I had not actually heard of her in all my studies before until fairly recently. That in and of itself is a problem. So Ida B. Wells was actually a businesswoman, head of a newspaper, and this was a time when women, especially women of color, didn't usually do that sort of thing. So she was a public businesswoman there. You didn't have that, uh, and she decided to use her newspaper as a platform to take on lynching. Her office was ransacked, and she was essentially exiled to the north, and that's where she began a systematic study of lynching, kind of creating what you would consider a rudimentary database, if you want to call it that, of lynching incidences, and also looking for hidden motivations behind lynching. So she takes on misinformation and financial motivations. Uh, it's very interesting. This may be one of the earliest criminological and sociological works on mass violence, and I honestly just picked this book up on a lark. I saw it on a shelf in the criminology section of the library I go to, Halle Library across the street. Detroit, 1967. Well, for those of you who are not students of history, this centers around the events I believe started on July 23rd, and that is essentially the Detroit riot, which was like a week of destruction. This book is, pretty informative, and, it's an interesting section of history to read about because it was only 1 week. So, it's not like you're going to find a massive 19-piece set of works on the issue. You can find actual individual books on specific incidences that happen, but yeah, one 300-page book can accurately sum up a lot of the events. I might do some follow-through on this and read more specifically about it. But Detroit, 1967, you had a population that was congesting. You had a lot of stuff going on, race relations problems with the Detroit Police Department and whatnot. And it made conditions perfect for, mass rioting. Michigan haunts public places, eerie spaces. And this was just a fun book here. I'm part of a paranormal research club, and this was hawked at the last meeting. So I said, okay, I'll get it. I'm bored. So I got that on my Kindle there, and I did just a review about this book here. I don't believe in this ghost stuff, but I find going these places can be pretty fun. Now, you do have to turn off the portion of your brain that analyzes history. A lot of the stuff they mention in these books about the history of these places didn't really happen. Childless, this is from the professional library at the place I work at, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services building. I've tried to make it an attempt this year to learn more about their side of things, of course, and they work with couples who are trying to adopt. Side Hustles for Dummies. This one actually is applicable to my life. I have a buddy who really wants to purchase a house, and he's looking at interesting ways to make some money on the side. And I'm actually going to be meeting up with him hopefully this weekend to go through some stuff. His idea mainly is to do a podcast. I don't really know how viable an idea that is, especially if earning some extra cheddar is your goal. It seems to me that a lot of these podcasts and other such things are, their feast or their famine. You've got, a very tiny sliver of people who gets even $1,000 a month versus the rest of everybody who just gets, nothing. Hello, everyone. So this is just going to be a quick video of the books I read in May. The first two books are in the For Dummies series. I really like that. So the first one, Criminology for Dummies. So this gets into the motivations for crime. Even though I actually have a master's degree from Michigan State University, I never took an intro to criminology class. I just took a lot of high-level criminal justice classes. So this actually covered some ground that I found interesting, at least for the purposes of motivations for crime. This book was a bit of a time waster. The Zak Bagans, this is very much just a book about himself, and anything it gets into with a lot of the stuff of the paranormal is stuff that you already know if you study that field. There was an interesting piece of equipment that's name I forgot, and it was featured in this book, so that's good. Unfortunately, it's no longer being made. So, Pyrrhic victory at best. Better policing with Microsoft Office. I'm huge into open source intelligence gathering. It's how I help combat human trafficking. This book shows you how you can go much further with applications you're already using, or programs you're already using. Blink. This was the 50th book I read this year and recommended to me by a friend in the Department of Homeland Security. It's by Malcolm Gladwell, and this gets into, knee-jerk and gut responses and why they were right. I actually did a whole video just on this because it was one of the one-day reads. The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper. This was a really awesome book that's essentially a biography of the 5 women. Unfortunately, I forget their names. I know Polly Nichols was the very first one. Governing the World Without World Government, just kind of a treatise by a political scientist on what he thinks the future of government may hold. Who Moved My Cheese? Initially started out, pun intended, as a cheesy book, but really had me examining my life and various decisions, or rather misdecisions, that make me the person who I am today, for better or for worse. Adventures in Adventures in Parenting. So this was just kind of a cutesy book. When you get this professional development literature from my workplace, a lot of it falls into the silo of sort of, I would say, almost common sense axioms for new parents. Counterterrorism, community-based approaches to preventing terror crime. Very great read, but this is by Palgrave Macmillan, I believe it's pronounced. Macmillan, very famous big publisher. Palgrave, just an imprint, or a sort of subcategory within them. Very informative reading. Well cited. These books all have kind of a style. They tend to be very similar in length, and they tend to be highly technical, very dry reads. So I would say you got to keep that in mind when you're looking into the Palgrave series. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So this is a summary of the books I've read in the month of June. Going to be a quick summary. I think there's only 8 or 9 books. Pornography and Genocide, The War Against Women. This book gets into violence that happens around the world that's specifically targeted at females. It's an interesting book. Of course, the person uses a different term of genocide. I actually got into that when I did a video just specifically on this book, and it blames pornography for pretty much everything. Not necessarily a coherent argument, but it is a well-researched read. Hatred of Democracy, a book I checked out of the library because of the title. And essentially, it's just a rant that has not a lot to do with democracy. Um, the person who wrote this book really hates Jewish people. That's very clear in the beginning. I really have no idea what this book was about after reading it. Campus Rape Culture, Identity and Myths. As I said, the unofficial theme of June for me is murder and mayhem. Campus Rape Culture, Identity and Myths. This is an interesting book. Unlike the previous book I read, which talks about violence against women, is definitely an advocacy book. This book is an advocacy book, but it's more so a history and breakdown of the IRMA itself. For those of you not in the know, the IRMA is the Illinois Rape Myth Acceptance Test. And you might not have ever heard of this, but you may have heard statistics on the news, kind of not reported with the most accuracy, that 39% of men don't feel they need affirmative consent, or 20% of the college thinks that a man is owed sex if he pays for dinner, stuff like that. It's not nearly as simple of a test as the media would have you believe, but then again, this is the country we live in, folks. Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs. So this is by Palgrave, and Palgrave, for those of you who don't know, that's the publishing company, not the actual authors. Palgrave does these very dry, informative criminal justice books, and this one attempts to tackle more so the theories behind how do you classify an outlaw motorcycle gang. Is it a social group that has a criminal element in it? Is it a criminal group that has a social element in it? And it's very hard, to draw a distinction, because not only do biker gangs differ radically from each other, but chapters differ radically from each other. A chapter for the uninitiated is a subdivision bound to a specific geography of a motorcycle club. So I'm gonna take an example and say the Hells Angels. There's the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, but then there's Hells Angels Los Angeles chapter, Hells Angels, and I'm just picking cities. I don't know if there's chapters. Hells Angels Phoenix chapter, stuff like that. This book, again, really good from that perspective. And although Palgrave's books are dry, they are also fairly quick. An essay on the principle of population. So this is Thomas Malthus, and he's sort of the first well-known person to document population growth, and essentially a doomsayer that the population of people is getting way too big, and that if left ungoverned, the population of humans is always going to be greater than the subsistence. In other words, we're going to have too many people, we can't feed them all. So, and this was back in like the 1800s, so a lot of this stuff hasn't come to fruition. How the Other Half Lives. This is essentially a immigrant to the United States, grew up in New York, got rich, and became a newspaper magnate, I believe, and then started to hate New York because of all the poor immigrants. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but I like to say he went full-blown American. So I'm not quite... actually, yes, the phrase, how the other half lives, is actually not originated from this book. In fact, he quotes it from somebody else. I was wondering that myself. Lots of good information in here. And interestingly enough, as racist as this book is, it ends with a call to reform. Because however insensitive this guy is at pointing out the problems of the poor, he does suggest reforms, and he feels that they're being essentially ripped off, taking smaller renting spaces at a higher rate and have essentially nothing left over. And he gets into how, gangs can form and life can be so cheap when you can't acquire something. Outlaw motorcycle gangs as organized crime groups. And this is essentially just a very concise read. Certain people, such as like me, other people who study crime, people who actually ride motorcycles, are going to know all the information in this book. This gets into stuff like culture, like what the various symbols mean and stuff like that. All in all, pretty fun, but not for seasoned people who read a lot of who study criminology. Avoiding rape on and off campus. So I saw this in the same section I checked out the other couple books, and I thought it would be very interesting to read this to see how social attitude was. I believe this was written in the 80s. And what was good advice, which this has some good advice. You know, the author does say everybody needs to be, very wary of the environments they're in and stuff like that. It also has some advice that is at best useless and may almost cause you problems, if anything else. So, oh wait, hold on, there's one more. So, Mitch Albom's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. This book was both a tearjerker and massively uplifting. This is Mitch Albom's first foray into fiction, and it's the first fiction book I've read by him. I've read the 3 other books. I read Tuesdays with Morrie, which is bar none his most famous and his most successfully selling book. And that's because, for a couple reasons, it's a great book, but also some universities make it required reading for things like grieving and if you're going through Kubler-Ross and all that. And then first book I read by him, Have a Little Faith, which is him returning to New Jersey and talking to his rabbi and stuff like that. And the other, Finding Chica was the other one, about a sick child. I skew massively nonfiction, but this book, I'm really glad that I took some time to read it. Been on my list for a while. And it's about a guy who dies on his 82nd birthday. And, when he gets to heaven, he's kind of wondering what it's all been worth. He thinks life has been meaningless. And he's taken on this journey by, you guessed it, 5 people he meets. And he realizes how his life, even if he didn't intend it to, has greatly affected those around him. Like I said, takes you through the full gamut of motions, if you will. So, that's it. That was my June reading list. Hello, everyone. What follows is going to be the list of books I read this July. Not very many books, but books of substance nonetheless. Poaching, Wildlife Trafficking, and Security in Africa. This gets into a lot of the reality behind the myth of wildlife trafficking, and certainly given the fact that we're in sort of post-pandemic era, wildlife is a vector for disease, so I expect there to be a lot more emphasis on, making sure there's more security on animals traversing into areas that could be, where they could be considered invasive species. The pornography industry, what everyone needs to know. So, yeah, okay, I expect this to be a very weird title and get some funny comments in the comments section. So, there's been a sort of push for those of us who study human trafficking to study pornography. I don't know why, other than for the fact that there's an influx of money into the cause. If you say you don't like pornography, there's definitely the right wing in the anti-trafficking movement that has a lot of money. Sex trafficking and human rights, the status of women and state responses. So this book gets into the concept of, should we have a victim-based approach or a criminal justice approach? Now, some people might ask, why not have both? To me, that's going to be a very simple answer. You can't, concentration on everything is concentration on nothing. Transnational organized crime, an overview from 6 continents. This is a pretty good piece, and this author, Jay Albanese, hope I pronounced that correctly. I know there's 2 authors here, but the one was mentioned in the book on poaching that was the first book I read in July. Inside the Mind of a Serial Rapist. Dennis J. Stevens. Okay, so this book, and I think I did a solo video just exploring this book in True Crime Tuesday. What this book really gets into is why do men rape? So there was a researcher, I assume they're a researcher, wrote a book called Against Our Will. It was written by a woman named Susan Brown Miller, who said that rape had no sex component, was all about power. This sounds like a high-minded academic concept, and surely enough, here we realize that it's not actually true. Most rapists are lust rapists. At least in this work, although there's only about 61 actual people surveyed, convicts. Soul on Ice. I bought this not knowing that this was a book about incarceration. So that was pretty interesting. Narcas. This is a book about the rise of women in Latin American cartels. Pretty interesting stuff. You know, women have often been overlooked, and sometimes that can be a good thing. Certainly, the book gets into how they get far lighter sentences and whatnot. So, pretty interesting read and pretty quick. Even if you're somebody who knows a lot about the drug trafficking cartels, you know, you can get into them. A book that's not on here, but I swear I read this month, was In the Belly of the Beast, Letters from Prison. So that was a pretty interesting book itself. I don't know why I excluded it from the list, or maybe it was actually last month's read. But either way, July was pretty much the month of murder and mayhem for my summer reading list. Thank you. Hello everyone, so this is going to be a quick video summarizing books that I read in August. Not a lot of them, unfortunately. The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View. Might surprise people as I'm a Christian that I did this, but you should be open-minded. Aaron Adair, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You know, this is not a hateful book on him at any part. It's actually very educational and informative. When the Astors Owned New York. If you love Western decadence, this book is for you. Diamond Doris. I'm a big true crime person, and this is a huge one about a thief who does social manipulation to make off with some very, very impressive diamonds. Napoleon, A Concise Biography. So despite loving history, despite being a veteran, I have not read a book about Napoleon until this year. And this was a good place to start, and shout out to, I think it's called Real History, REEL History, a YouTube channel by a historian who breaks down movies. Nonprofit Kit for Dummies. If you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, this book is definitely for you. The Italian Invasion of Africa. My friend Yusuf hosted a movie night, so I wanted to bone up on the history of that. Religion as Resistance. This gets into Omar Mukhtar and his resistance against the Libyan forces. Plato's Meno, classical work on construct validation. Very short, but very influential and very heady. Makes you think. The Theory of the Leisure Class. This is the last book I read this year. This month. Or actually the month of August. And this gets into how it's been a detriment to the middle class and the poor in ways that they've tried to imitate the upper class. And one thing they mention here in particular is colleges. You know, that, how much of your college classes did you actually need is a good example of that, you know. College is a luxury of the rich, and then it was peddled to the rest of us as being a prestige thing. And so you go and you have to take a bunch of literature classes that you don't actually like just to get a degree that, let's admit it, is getting less and less valuable. Hello everyone. So this is my video for the books I read in the month of September. I think it's 10 books. Locked Out of Development talks about how difficult it can be for people to get jobs in the Middle Eastern region. The Falcon and the Snowman. This is the incredible true story of espionage that happened, I want to say, in the 70s with two friends. One a government contractor, the other a drug dealer. This was a quick read I found on Amazon. It's about Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's project to identify UFOs or unknown aerial phenomenon, UAPs. It's just a bunch of official documents. This actually came with a gift that I gave to a friend. I read the little booklet and then put it back and gave him the gift set. Go Ask Alice. This book was very controversial when it came out, and it's been a bestseller for. It was a bestseller for a while, and it's the first book I think that takes on teen drug addiction. Beyond Good and Evil, a bunch of essays by Friedrich Nietzsche. Pretty interesting guy. This was a publication that was released by the History Channel and whoever owns all those intellectual properties and whatnot. I'm sure it's owned by a board that owns a lot of stuff. That's just how things are these days. They put this out every time it gets close to spooky season. Fear and Trembling. This is about this is a Soren Kierkegaard's perspective on Abraham sacrificing his son. The Four Agreements, really just a self-help book. Nothing extremely profound in here, but not bad advice. Gods, Man, and War. Secret Machines. Boy, did this book suck and was terribly racist. I did a video just about this book. And that's all we got for this month when it comes to the September reads. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So this is going to be my wrap-up of books I read in October. October being spooky season, you're going to notice a theme with these books. First, Cryptozoology A to Z. This was a fun book on monsters. Agony's Lodestone. It was actually a very serious read about grief and family tragedy. This is a horror novella set in a specific section of Canada. This was an intriguing read and some really good concepts here. Some stuff doesn't really get as developed as I would have liked it to have been, but nevertheless, pretty good. Mapping the Interior. This is one of the weirdest horror stories that I read this October. And to be honest with you, I don't understand a lot of how it ended. You might not like this if you don't like a lot of psychological, it could all be a dream type of books, and I don't. Nothing But Blackened Teeth. This is set in Japan, which is pretty cool because I lived in Japan for a couple of years. Other than that, there isn't much original here. Typical haunted house book. Halloween Fiend. This was a very odd book, C.V. Hunt, and it is the whole thing kind of like a mixture of The Lottery, by Jackson, mixed with the whole haunted town kind of concept. There's this fiend, and every year a human sacrifice is made to this entity that stops it from hurting people year-round. Sorry for that picture. Autumn Crow High, Fresh Hell. This continues where the book Autumn Crow left off. Autumn Crow is a collection of short stories based in a creepy fictional town. I think memories of where we spent a lot of time. I can't say grow up because, I don't have a home state or a hometown. Kind of an itinerant in my youth, as you will. But I think people form complex relationships with where they grow up, and there's the good side to it of community, but then there's the downside of it a lot of times of the creepiness, the eeriness, people hunting and stalking children, stuff like that. So this is sort of a non-fiction mystical book about items that were held to be sacred or charmed by the Roman Empire. The Hidden Life of Wolves. I thought at first this might just be some kind of a cute picture book, but it actually is not. It's a full-on really good book about wolves and how wolves are essentially almost extinct in North America as far as, say, being a naturally occurring species in the wild. They have to be bred and put into national parks. Monsters in the Midwest, just a fun book about, folklore. The Werewolf of Grosse Pointe and Other Stories. I might actually do just a video on this book. So, a long story short, this collection of folklore tales by which I forget, Marianne Kalko, who went by the name Gundella, and her daughter actually opened up an occult store right next to Garden City High School, which I attended briefly. Again, the whole thing with being moved around a lot, no hometown, no home state. And I did some investigation into this just a couple years ago. So it has been probably over 25 years since I set foot in Garden City High School, and I only went there for like a semester and a half. But a few years ago, I was researching this, and I wanted to see if there was a tie-in, because in this book, there's an address mentioned in Garden City that you could send a P.O. box if you want Gundella to look into Phenomenon. Probably, of course, long since been canceled or whatnot or reassigned. And I found out that the person who ran that occult shop was the daughter, and that the daughter of Gundella was murdered several years after Gundella passed away. She was killed by her husband on October 31st of like 1998 or 97. Very interesting. Behind the Legend, The Loch Ness Monster. This is one of 3 books I read that's just good old Halloween spooky season fun. Behind the Legend, Werewolves. Obviously a pivot to more serious stuff here. Loch Ness Monster kind of is a fascination, but has never hurt anybody. People did actually fear werewolves. This is the most serious because zombies, of course, we get that from Haiti, and Haiti is struggle. This is the final book I read, and I read it in one day, and I read it on October 31st, so the Halloween book. And this is Haunted Michigan Graveyards. You know, as somebody who doesn't really believe in this stuff, at least these reads are very fun for me. And I might visit some of these places. You know, some people consider me a debunker. I don't really like that term because I think people think I walk in or I'm coming into these things, haunted spaces, with an agenda to disprove something, when really I'm coming in to see some cool phenomenon. I just never see what's reported. Either way, that's my reading wrap-up for October. Thank you all. So this is a list of books I read in the month of November. Not a lot. We got a massive uptick in work, so I wasn't able to read as many this year. So only really 3 books here. What an Owl Knows, The Science of the World's Most Enigmatic Birds. I don't know if I'm the only one fascinated by owls. Well, I know I'm not the only one, but they operate a weird niche, so to speak. They're a heck of a predator adaptation-wise, but yet still a prey to like falcons and eagles and stuff like that. So it's very weird how they've learned to both kill and evade. They may be the only species that has this type of niche. A remarkable book, very interesting stuff about the owl. I might now go take a trip and go owl spotting if there's an opportunity available. I know they are in Michigan, but they're very stealthy. They're hard to find. They have exceptional hearing and make almost no noise. The Leica M Photographer. This was actually interesting because I half expected it to be just a blustery book about the value of Leica and why you should buy Leica. Instead, I actually found out more about the soul of photography from this book. And, as somebody who's kind of just did photography as part of human trafficking investigations, this past year I've been taking it very seriously. And so this book contains a lot for the new photographer. And just, I'll say it obviously some good photos. This guy knows what he's doing. Demonic Foes. Boy, does this book really kind of split me, because this could all just be bluster and BS, or it could not be. This person could be describing what he actually saw and everything like that. This person isn't a psychiatrist, an MD, but did they work with the Vatican or anything like that? Well, this is all stuff, conveniently enough, no one can verify. and that's just due to the very nature of the work and confidentiality and all that. This particular author started out as writing for, I think it was Washington Post, and would contribute these columns. Uh, you'll read this book I'd say if like the movie The Exorcism was your thing, read this book. Thank you. This is the list of books I read for December. And yeah, this is unfortunately not good. I only read 2 books, as I explained previously. Uptick in how I work and where I work and everything else like that. That's what kind of created some problems. Basically, these 2 books are kind of juvenile books, but hey, they were factual and interesting. 25 Deep Sea Creatures. This gets into the organisms that are, more or less evolved to feel a niche in high pressure areas of the ocean. Pretty amazing some of the adaptations that you actually see on some of these animals, such as like bioluminescence and things such as that. 25 deadly animals in the world. I really honestly have been racking my brain to try to figure out how they came up with the animals that they came up. I'm not saying they're wrong, but yeah, I don't remember, I don't think the mosquito or the rat got on there, but they've certainly borne a lot of diseases that have killed people. This is very confusing to me. So I do think it was a cool read. Lots of snakes in there because they're venomous, but overall, I can't really say how they qualified deadly, Because yes, polar bears are deadly, but they're not that deadly to humans, or at least documented wise, they really haven't been. So it seemed they didn't know whether they wanted to make this about top carnivores or venomous animals or whatever. So you get a smattering of this. If you're going on, say, a plane ride or a train ride or something like that, either way, someplace we're going to be bored out of your mind for hours. Both these books are actually really good books. They're made just for that. Overall, I just want to say thank you to those of you who have been watching me throughout the year and stuff. And next year, I don't know quite what the situation will be reading-wise. I still want to read books, but I also want to read more to publications, news publications. I might subscribe to Forbes magazine and stuff like that and start another series or whatnot. Either way, thank you all for sticking out with me this long.